The South African Revenue Service has collected nearly 1.9 trillion rand for the 2024-2025 financial year. This has exceeded the tax authority's expectations by 8.8 billion rand. SARS says more than 730 billion rand of its collections are from personal income taxes. The Revenue Services has faced a number of challenges this past season, including the hijacking of e-filing profiles and tax dodges. This led to the government allocating around 7 billion rand to modernize its system over the next 3 years. Edward Kieswetter will be joining us to have that conversation. That is the SARS Commissioner. Commissioner, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. So higher than expected revenue that has been collected, also considering that when it comes to salary or wage increases, those salary and wage increases have been lower than what was expected. How were you able to do it?
Good morning, Albert. Yes, I think that's an important question. We forget that the budget estimate that the minister sets for the Revenue Authority every year is based on a model that is premised on certain assumptions of what would happen in the economy. As you quite rightly pointed out, when the initial estimate was tabled, there was an assumption that wages would grow by 8.4% year on year, whereas in fact we know now that wages have only grown by about 4.6%. We assumed that exports would grow year on year by 6%, and we know that the actual imports have contracted by 1.3%, and fuel levy we thought would increase by about 8 or 9%, and in fact consumption has decreased by about 10%. So these are real economic variables that translates into growth in the economy, and ultimately result in profits, in wages, and in consumption expenditure, all of which are then taxed. When those variables decline, you would expect the revenue to decline. In the second half of the year, there was a slight reprieve in one or two areas. Firstly, we know that the two-pot retirement kicked in, and we assumed initially that the contribution to the tax system from this would be around 5 or 6 billion, whereas in fact we now know that it was well over 11 billion. So that is an upward variable or change. And the second is, as a result of that, we have released about 47.7 billion of withdrawal into the economy. And that in itself then has an impact on consumption. Interest rates came down, inflation came down, prices therefore was adjusted, and that also fueled a little bit of consumption. So those are the ups and the downs. But at the center of that, and the most impactful variable, is the compliance effort which SARS exacts on the entire revenue base. Let me talk about that for a moment, because whereas there was marginal ups and downs on all of the other variables, the year-on-year growth in compliance revenue was 15.8%, and therefore contributed just over 300 billion to the 1.855 trillion that we announced. Now we know that that revenue is based on specific actions that the 13,000 employees of SARS administer every day. By way of example, and for the benefit of listeners, we had to resolve 3.7 million instances of debt collection, which that would range anything from a phone call to an SMS, a letter to a taxpayer, a friendly reminder, a lot more sterner reminder, and eventually we may resort to a civil judgment, freezing of assets, attaching of assets. These are all of the legal instruments available for us. That body of work resulted in 94 billion rand, which would otherwise not be in the fiscus. Another 103 billion rand in this amount relates to the use of artificial intelligence, data science, and the machine learning algorithms that we compose to detect and prevent possible fraudulent or impermissible refunds, because the refund area is a huge area of concern. Yeah. 103 billion rand was added to the fiscus, which resulted from 1.7 million cases that have been alerted and further verified by SARS. So these are the examples of what ultimately made up the growth beyond the revised estimate and delivering the very pleasing result of 1.855 trillion rand.
Yeah, and then speaking about the refunds, an 8.2% higher than the previous year and 3 billion rand above the revised estimate. What does this also then tell us about the efficiencies within SARS to be able to reach this particular amount, and also to build this trust relationship between the clients that you serve?
And Aldred, I'm glad you raised the trust relationship, because trust is sacrosanct, it's central to the social contract that South Africans have with the state, and in particular with the Revenue Authority. We're very pleased that we can share with you that in 2019-2020, trust as measured through an independent survey had fallen to 48%. We have worked hard to earn back that trust, and in our last measurement, trust is at 75% from 48%. This speaks to this engagement that we have, which is honest and direct, but also independent without fear and favor. And one of the elements is the efficiency with which we administer the refunds. Now, every refund claim holds a risk for us. We cannot stop every one of the 8 million taxpayers who have a filing obligation with us, and we cannot stop every one of the 4.5 million VAT returns. So we use AI to compute the assessment outcome and then to flag or alert a return by a taxpayer that may hold risk for us. And all of this is done by AI, and then our people do the actual verification work, engages with the taxpayer, and this work collectively has allowed us to pay out this huge refund of over 400 billion rand, whilst at the same time prevent the impermissible outflow of refunds of over 100 billion rand.
Yeah, and then comes the contentious issue, Commissioner, around the budget. So the proposal that was made in the budget is around the 7.5 billion rand split over 2 years that SARS would be receiving, and you've indicated that 4 billion rand of that money will be directed to short-term revenue recovery. What happens in this particular case if the budget is not approved by Parliament? What would SARS's next step then be to ensure that it's still able, or try at least, to meet its targets? And as it stands currently, as the Commissioner, are you concerned that there's a possibility that the budget could not be passed?
Well, let's first say that the announcement by the Minister has already made it clear that over and above the baseline allocation to SARS, that in this year, 500 million has been earmarked for modernization and 2 million for short-term revenue recovery. And then over the outer years, 1.5 and 1.5 million respectively for modernization, 500 and a billion rand for debt in each of the outer years. So for this year, we would do what we have done every other year. We work with the resources that we have. We have consistently raised the funding concerns with the Minister and Treasury, and the Minister has heard us, and within the available resources has tried to respond positively. Should the 2 billion allocated for this year, which was announced by the Minister, if the budget is not approved, then that will have to follow legal due process, so that an additional allocation, in fact, can be made when there is a future appropriation. The Minister can always, under special circumstances, table another budget that takes care of the allocation, because it's not just the allocation of SARS that matters. There is a revenue allocation bill, that the so-called DORA bill, that has to be tabled to Parliament as well, that looks at the allocation of expenditures. So I think the legal processes will follow its course. In the meantime, SARS will do what it has always done, work within our available resources and focus on those areas, maybe shift more of our resources to the short-term revenue recovery projects like debt collection and following up outstanding returns. And we will find ways and means to do what we have demonstrated we can do by delivering this pleasing result of the current year.
Yeah, I'm going to try my luck here, Commissioner, with this question. Earlier on, you spoke about the measures that are in place, as well as legal framework that actually empowers SARS to go after tax dodgers and those who owe the taxmen. In the matter of Royal AM, are you able to state how far you are with the sale of Royal AM? We understand that there was a bid, but then the person who won the bid couldn't actually pay the money within time. And then we understand that the deal was then cancelled. Are you able to speak to that?
I don't want to get into the details or the specifics, but because what is in the public domain is that this entity, the soccer club, the business entity that holds the soccer club, is one of the assets that SARS has attached. And SARS, therefore, has some legal authority over the assets. But then there is a curator that works, that mediates between the taxpayer and SARS. And ultimately, we cannot follow a process that seeks to favor any particular buyer of any asset that we wish to dispose. That is a process that follows transparently. Our interest is to ensure that the best outcome for SARS is secured. And the best outcome for SARS is to make sure that the revenue that is due to the state is in fact recovered. Who ends up with the asset, we are impartial or indifferent to that. We do not favor a particular bidder or a particular potential acquirer of any asset that we have attached. Our interest is securing the interests, and in this case, particularly the revenue interest of SARS.
Thank you so much for your time. Edward Kieswetter is the SARS Commissioner there, speaking to us on the provisional results of the tax revenue that has been collected.